Okay, we have another question. Do you have any experiences with support groups? Very little. And I mean, I have to admit that part of the reason why I don't have much experience with support groups is that I am not a social person, and a support group is a social situation. I don't tend to get support from being in a room in close quarters with other people. It's just not something that makes me happy. Now, I can give lectures, and I can give speeches, and I can answer questions, and I can do those sorts of things because I can overcome my distaste for being among people. And the reason why I overcome my distaste is because being autistic, I grew up in a world where it was hell simply because people were ignorant about autism. And I don't want anybody living on the autism spectrum today, that is born today or will be born in the future, I don't want them to live in the world that I lived in, where everybody was saying, oh, you're sick, you need to go to a hospital, you're never going to amount to anything, you don't need to go to school, we should just, put you away, lock you away, and forget you exist. I don't want anybody going through that. So if giving a speech in a room with 3,000 people in it is going to help enlighten the world and make it better for the person living on the autism spectrum, the child living on the autism spectrum today, then of course I'm going to get out there and I'm going to speak and I'm going to answer the questions and I'm going to give all the insights I possibly can, because what I went through as a child was so horrible, I never want anybody to go through it again. But when it comes to support groups, now I've spoken to all sorts of support groups where they've asked me questions and they get insights as to how to behave at a job, how to seek a job, how to behave in an interview, how to empower the people around you to help support you in your endeavors in the job. I mean, so, I've done that. But support groups, when it comes to, where people are like, okay, Wolf, you need to do this. And I've been a lone wolf for so long. When I was young, there were no support groups. They barely knew what autism was. Autism was discovered in like the 1940s, 1945, somewhere in there, in Germany. I think the doctor's name was Kenner. And then the other doctor that discovered pretty much the same thing, they didn't know it at the time, and that was that Dr. Asperger. So, and I came along only about 15 years later. 15, 16, however many years later. And they didn't know that much about it, and what the medical doctors at the time were telling my grandparents, put him in the hospital because that was the standard of care. I was a non-verbal autistic that used to rock and seemed to be oblivious to everything around me. And they did not expect me to do anything other than continue along that same trajectory. My grandparents had a different thought, and so they kept me. But because I had to figure it all out on my own, I had no support groups. I did have 2 doctors at University Hospital, but basically they were watching me. They were learning from me so that they could help people in the future that have autism. They didn't really have much to help me. And I know that because the doctor actually told me. The doctor actually told me, he said, Wolf, you're teaching us. He said, that's why we have you come down here every 2 weeks. And we ask you all these questions, because you are teaching us. And obviously they must have learned something, because autism care has gotten better and better and better and better as the years have gone on, and I like to think that I had a little something to do with that. But what all of those years trying to figure out how to survive on the autism spectrum has done is it made me very self-sufficient. I didn't need support groups, well, because they weren't there. And I'm not used to using support groups because I've always had to figure it out on my own. And I guess you can say you can't teach an old wolf new tricks. And that's why I really don't have the kind of experience with support groups that I think the questioner may be looking for. Because I came along at a time when there was no support. And now that I'm an old and grizzled wolf, you know, when I go to a support group, I'm usually there to offer insight and answer questions and to reassure, to talk to parents and that sort of thing. And so I'm sort of a facilitator rather than a group participant. All right, so that's the answer to that question.